Hello. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Pete Craven, who is a software engineering and tech leader. We're going to be speaking about how to get a job as a software engineer, some top tips, and how you can secure the best talent on the market, all in this episode of the podcast.
The Alfie Whattam podcast.
Cool. Thank you, Pete, for joining me today and coming onto the podcast. Let's just kick people off with a little bit of background. Who are you? Tell me about the business and tell me about your background, mate.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Pete Craven. I'm Director of Platform Engineering at Slalom. I'm based up in Manchester, so I head up the platform engineering team here. Slalom is a global consultancy. We're from America, basically, so we're everywhere in America, but we've taken over the world slowly. So Europe is our newest market. We've currently got London, Manchester, Munich, and Dublin. Manchester's been around probably a couple of years now, so we're still fairly growing and trying to get our name out there and getting more people involved and growing, both in headcount and in market share.
Yeah.
My area is within Slalom Build, which is the build division who do product engineering. So we're kind of the people who come in and actually build the cool things that we've come up with the ideas for. So we work very closely with our clients to solve their problems and then build them something really cool to use and hopefully do a lot more business with them. So.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for the intro, mate. Manchester seems to be exploding as a tech scene at the moment. We've got so many clients on the recruitment side who are just growing at a faster rate than many London companies. And I think what it was a lot of people that left London during COVID and kind of haven't gone back, and that's really benefited other areas of the UK. Okay, let's kick off with candidates. So a lot of people that watch the podcast are searching for opportunities, or maybe they're happy where they are, but maybe they're open to hearing about new roles. Step one of going for a new position really is to get a good CV in order and a LinkedIn page, really. But when it comes to best practice when writing a resume, you've probably reviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of software engineers and tech professionals' CVs. You must know what the good, the bad, and the ugly is, what red flags to avoid, what you like about certain resumes. What, just at a high level, Pete, what would be kind of your tips for candidates and software developers looking to put together a CV?
So the first one is just keep it really tidy. A lot of people end up trying to put too much effort into making it look really fancy and nice, and we don't see that. A lot of the time these have come through some kind of HR system, so it all gets stripped out and can often break the formatting and make it harder to read your CV. So that's a pretty simple one. In terms of actual how you write about your jobs, I always say write about what you actually did. Don't just say what the company does or what your team does, because it's not as relevant. We'd rather hear about your actual experience. I worked on this and it delivered this value to the business, those kind of things. So that's quite a nice one. And then just explaining a bit about how you've traveled through that job. So often you might just put, I worked in this company for 6 years and this was my role, but you probably didn't have that role the whole time. So trying to explain I started as a junior and then I moved up to senior and then I moved up to lead, trying to explain that kind of trajectory rather than saying I was a lead for 6 years, because that looks like you've kind of stagnated in one place. So I look for those kind of things, telling us a bit about the tech you've used. So if you, a .NET developer, tell us about .NET, tell us a little bit about the frameworks, the things you've used, talk about the architecture, talk about anything that you can in that area. So it's just trying to be as detailed as possible to basically do a mini interview before you even turn up. So I should be able to go straight into an interview and be like, tell me about this cool thing you did on AWS using this. What were you doing? Why were you doing it? How did it work? I think, just trying to get your experience across in a succinct way is quite useful.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with all of that. And I suppose just to reiterate, really, a lot of the times candidates will use those kind of fancy websites for generating a CV, but you're absolutely right, Pete. It messes up the format and it makes it really hard for recruiting and HR software to compile it and keyword match and assess if it's the right fit for the role. I love that your mention of focusing on individual achievements. I find so many times candidates will say, we did this, we did that, when in reality, you're not looking to hire their team, you're looking to hire them as a person. And oftentimes, if they're using the word we rather than I. They're hiding behind the achievements of others, I often find. Love what you mentioned around telling the story. I think a CV at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's you presenting your story about why you, what you've done and why you could be a good fit for the employer. So not just listing out, roles and responsibilities. If you're a developer, I wrote code. I mean, everyone knows that you did that. I mean, that's your job, right? So, but what story, what achievements, what bragging points can you mention? And then about the tech, I mean, that's such a basic one, but something that's often overlooked, right? People will list every technology they've ever touched for 5 minutes, and you need to be able to, say that you're a senior in these areas, you're a junior in these areas. Otherwise, I get your CV, I think you're a great, AWS guru, and then it turns out you've touched it for 5 minutes. So I definitely agree with all of that. And I think people listening and watching, definitely if they apply some of those ideas, they will have a higher CV to interview conversion rate when applying for roles. So let's say people have taken that advice on board and they've now got themselves an interview. What tips would you give to candidates who are then going on that interview journey? Same type of question, but not on CVs. Let's talk about the interviewing process. What advice would you give to candidates to secure their chances of getting the job?
So I don't really go with the whole you should rehearse anything for an interview. I think you're kind of better off going in a little bit loose and to play off how they do it. But if you want to kind of plan a little bit, it's probably planning out how you're going to explain your job history. So why you left certain places. Like I was looking for a move up and this opportunity came up, so I decided to go there, and that helped me develop these skills. Trying to form that story of where you've been, similar to what I said with the CV, to be fair, but a little bit more detailed. I think that's always a nice intro. And then having probably a good example in your head, because if you're going for a tech job, someone's going to ask you about the tech you did. So having a really clear example of here's something I did that looked good, but also here's how I would do it differently is always quite nice. So often you'll hear someone who will say, we built this thing, we did it like this. And you go, okay, would you change any of that? And they go, no, I've never thought about it. And you're like, why? You should always question what you did. Like it's never going to be as good like 10 years ago when you did it then as you could do it now. So if you start questioning things like that, it shows you've really got like an analytical mind and you can think differently and you are looking to constantly improve. So I always think that's quite a nice one. I think that's probably the main ones, to be honest. The rest of it is based off what kind of questions you're asked and how the interviewer flows. Like we try to keep our interviews fairly like casual and nice and a bit chatty. We don't do the grilling kind of interviews, which I've had before, which are very stressful. Just staying fairly loose, I think is probably the best way to do an interview. Like if you're too worried, you're going to clam up and you're going to not come across well. And that never looks great when you have like a feedback session afterwards and have a chat. You're like, they didn't give us answers. They just going to give us one word answers, things like that.
Yeah.
The nerves, but try and not do that.
I think those are good points. I think telling the story, it's good that you've reiterated that because it's one of the biggest pieces of feedback I could give to candidates, rather than just saying what you did, explain why you did it, and that ties into the analytical part. I think nobody likes somebody that tries to pretend they're perfect all the time. Oftentimes it's better to admit when you've made mistakes and be humble, I suppose would be the way of describing it. I mean, it's a better way to be likable and genuine and honest, and people will appreciate that a little bit more. And then, of course, around asking questions, you're absolutely right. I mean, so many times I'll have somebody go for an interview and then at the end of the interview, they'll say, hey, have you got any questions for us? And they'll go, no. And it's just like, it shows that you don't care. It shows that you probably haven't done your research. It shows that you probably not really have been paying attention. There's so much that you want to know about. Tell me about the projects. Tell me about what the tech roadmap looks like. Tell me about, your competitors. Tell me about why you're different. Tell me about the benefits. Tell me about the career progression opportunities and all of that stuff. I mean, those are basic questions that you can ask, right? But I often find that if a candidate's willing to do a bit of research beforehand, maybe read the company's blog or check out their content, podcasts, videos, whatever, and then reflect those into the questions, say, hey, I saw that you wrote a blog on your personal LinkedIn or on the company page, you went to this event, you've acquired this company, tell me a little bit about that. Immediately as interviewers, you're like, wow, this person switched on, they know what they're talking about, right? What are those types of questions, the types that would impress you? I mean, what when you say that you like when candidates ask questions, did you have anything in particular in mind when you said that?
Yeah, I think they're all good questions, and even just ones where you just say at the end, like, well, what do you like the most about your company? Because it's sort of your chance to interview them a little bit. That's always nice. And even in a tech interview, if say they explain an architecture or something, we say, well, what would you do differently? And they don't really have any ideas. Even them saying to us, like, well, what would you change? It's quite an interesting way, because it's like you're trying to learn from those people who might have more experience. So it's being a little bit vulnerable, and even just saying to them, like, well, do you think this is right? Have I done it correct? Or have I got areas to improve on as well? Just those kind of things. It just makes it feel a bit more natural. And also you're being open, and you want them to know exactly who you are as a person, how you work, and need to know, like, if we hire you, are there areas where we need to help you and coach you and things like that? And it's better to know that up front, because you might go in and say, they need a bit of coaching on this, but that's fine. We can totally do that. If they just keep telling them, like, I'm the best person that's ever lived, you might come out and be like, I don't know if they are. And I don't think they're capable of understanding that they're not, and they need coaching. So you might not want someone like that to join the business.
It's like you're interviewing Donald Trump for a job or something if you get
Yeah, the anti-humble. So
exactly. I like that question. What do you like about working here? A really good question is to ask the opposite as well. What don't you like? If you could wave a magic wand and fix one thing, what would that be? That's a really intelligent question. Shows that you're not just willing to accept any opportunity. It shows that you're evaluating and comparing. And oftentimes the more that they feel you're in demand, the more likely they'll be interested. People, our monkey brains love to go to the shiny diamond because it's rare, and being rare as a candidate is a good commodity to have. What about on the flip side, Pete? So those are some really good interview tips for candidates looking for a position. This podcast is brought to you by WeLoveAlpha.com. If you're looking to grow and hire and scale your software engineering team in the UK, then go to WeLoveAlpha.com to hire the best software developers on the market. Everything across Java to C# to PHP to Python to React and Angular and mobile and more. Go to WeLoveAlpha.com to hire the best software engineers in the UK now. I suppose if we move on to the next part of the podcast, which is more about hiring managers. So when hiring leaders are interviewing prospect candidates, let's say that they've got somebody who's great, they're switched on, they're a good fit for the role. What could companies be doing, in your opinion, to help secure the right people, to increase their offer to acceptance ratio? What sort of tips would you give to interviewers? And you mentioned one a moment ago around kind of making it more of a relaxed conversation. I think that's a really, really good point. But what else would you recommend hiring leaders do?
I think some of it is going in with more of a relaxed conversation, because obviously if you employ somebody, you're not going to spend the whole time interviewing them in like a stressful setting. So you need to make them feel a bit more open and casual, just to kind of get an understanding of what will this person actually be like to work with. So that's why we try and do it as a bit more of a conversation, and we ask questions, and sometimes we let them ask questions or kind of mix it up a little bit, just because you kind of want to get a good feeling of, if this person's in the office and I put them on a project, will they get on with anybody, or are they like a great technical mind but they just don't want to work with people, are not open to ideas? You need to understand those kind of things, and with just going like a question approach, you're not going to get that feeling from them. So I think that's quite important to do, as like we do a little bit of a brief afterwards and kind of chat through, one, how did they answer the question, and two, what kind of vibe did we get from them? Like, did we get that they're like a friendly vibe, or are they going to come in and upset people? Those kind of things. I think probably to get to a successful place with it, some of it is consistency. It's making sure people have had the same kind of training and understand the process, and you don't get someone who does the interview and theirs is really easy to get through, and then someone else does it and it's near impossible to get through. you need kind of everyone on the same level. So like providing some kind of internal training or making people shadow, it's what we do. So we do a bit of training, and then we have to shadow like 3 of each interview before you're allowed to do your own interviews, and then you get shadowed twice, that kind of thing. So that all helps. And just having questions that are actually relevant. There's way too many jobs that I've interviewed for which have clearly heard the Google interview and decided that that's what they need to do, and they'll ask you questions which are not even remotely relevant to what that business does.
If you were an animal, what animal would you be, Pete? That sort of thing.
Those kind of ones, they tell you nothing about a human being. You
No,
just
no,
have to
it's
know it.
just people pretending to look smart, right?
Yeah, or even in the tech space, they sometimes will ask questions on. You'll know like a company is using AWS and they're using full stack JavaScript, something like that, and they'll ask you a completely pointless question about how does DNS work, and it's like most engineers won't need to know or care. Why are you asking this as part of your default process? So just making sure what you're actually asking is relevant. Like it's good to get an understanding of their broad knowledge, but if you kind of sell them the vision, like the dream of a really cool tech stack that you've asked them questions about, and then they join and it's like, this is like some 40-year-old legacy system.
Yeah.
Like it's not relevant to how you're interviewing.
Yeah.
The only other one I'd say is making sure that people are doing the interviews who actually do the job. So like you can do your recruiter screening and all of that, and you can do people doing like the more like the personality soft skills interviews, and it doesn't really matter which department they're from. But if you're hiring an engineer, have an engineer from your company interviewing them. Some companies have somehow got into a mode of outsourcing the first stage technical interviews to a third party who do the interviews, and it's not a good experience for anybody to turn up and be like, tell me what you like about the company that you work for. It's like, oh, we don't work for them, we work for someone else, we're just doing technical interviews. Because you can't then ask them anything, any questions that they've asked you aren't relevant to the job you've applied for.
I've never seen that go well, and I've seen that happen a lot of times, and I've just never seen it work before, to be honest.
No, I really don't know how that's become a thing, but I've seen it. A few companies have tried it, and it's like it's not a good experience for anybody. So I think you more anger the person being interviewed, so they're not going to accept, even if you offered them a really decent deal. You've already kind of soured it a little bit by saying we don't think you're worth our time, so we'll outsource it to someone else. So yeah, I think that they're probably one way to kind of like get yourself a little bit further ahead.
Okay, no, I agree with those insights. Keeping it casual. People are people, not robots at the end of the day, and then just making sure that the right people are asking the right questions and have been trained the right way. If you get any of those things wrong, then it can kind of fall apart, can't it? So, I'd certainly we're on the same page. All right, let's finish up with I suppose after they've been hired. So you've now brought somebody into the team. How do you keep them? How do you build strong retention, keep a great culture, enable diversity and flexibility and all of that stuff? We've kind of, if we complete the circle from applying to a role to interviewing on both ends to then getting the job and keeping them, it's obviously the main thing. What advice would you give to leaders who want to build out their cultures and improve retention and all that good stuff?
I mean, a lot of it's like similar to like the kind of ideas behind forming like high performing teams. So giving them autonomy to kind of work their way is a really good one. No one wants to be micromanaged, so kind of trusting your team know what they're doing and just giving them the guidance and the support that they need to do it. I think that's a really important one because people will stick around if they can do that kind of work. And just giving them interesting work. Like no one wants to really join a new job and immediately just be given the stuff that no one else wants to do because they're the newbie. They have to do this project or they have to do like this thing. It's like, that's not how you get people to want to stay. People will join and be like, this is rubbish now. How do I know it's going to get better? I'll just leave. So it's just all about like treating people well and trying to make sure that they're doing good, valuable work and something they're actually interested in doing. Because I wouldn't stay in a job if I joined and they gave me something I didn't want to do immediately. I'd be like, this is what I can go to any other company and do something way more interesting here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think a lot of it's about that. Like obviously there's like the office culture. So having reasons to come into the office. Like even if you're mostly remote or you're fully remote, it's trying to still build that community, rather than just people join and then just disappear into the ether because you don't have any reason like for people to talk to each other or meet up. I think they're quite important. What else would be useful actually? A lot of the stuff we do is trying to make sure people have got the right skills and they've got the development plans that they want. So we normally like catch people up and we immediately run them through our kind of career development framework, which kind of outlines like these are kind of the expected things for each level. Let's already start talking about how you can develop and where you want to develop in certain areas, and how we can support them in that journey. Like they might just want to learn a certain thing, or they might want to get really good at managing projects or doing public speaking, so we can support them in that journey. So getting that from day one is really valuable because it shows people like you're immediately valued. It's not like once you've got past your 3 months probation, then we'll value you as a human being. It's we value you from the minute you turn up.
Yeah.
So I think those are kind of good. It's just treating people how you'd want to be treated, basically.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what level of seniority you are. If you're the owner of the company, you should still treat everybody how you'd expect to be treated. So,
which so many companies just don't do they? I mean, you know, what you said is it's basic stuff, but it's often overlooked, isn't it? You know, people micromanage, people get put on legacy, monolith, boring projects because nobody else wants to do them. People force people to come into an office without a reason. I mean, it's okay to come in, but why are you coming in? You know, is there a team meeting? Is there, if you're just coming in and you're just sitting in the corner on your own and there's nobody there and you're being forced to do it 3 days a week, then, you know, that's a bit of a red flag. And then it blows me away how many companies don't have like development plans and you know, ways to tie in people's learning and upskilling to their individual progress and not just so that the company's progress. So, you know, I certainly agree with what you said there. You know, not just around learning new technologies, but around learning new skills. So speaking, writing, whatever it is, really. Okay, cool. Well, I hope that was useful to people listening, whether you're looking for a job or looking to hire. What about with you guys? Are you guys growing at the moment? Are there any roles which candidates listening should be applying to? You know, what types of developers should be approaching you and checking out your careers page? You know, what do you tend to look for?
At the moment, we're mainly growing in our other regions. So like I said, like we've got our Munich office, which is growing because it's one of the new markets. Our Dublin office is very new. So they're mostly the areas that we're focusing on. We are always looking for good people and like starting conversations, even if we're not actively hiring for a certain role. If we find someone who we think is great, we'll keep in touch. We'll potentially even just find them a role if we need it. For us, it's because we're a consultancy, it's people who are like excited by that kind of uncertainty, because there's a lot of uncertainty in consultancy because you get put on a project, you might know nothing about it. It might be a complete new tech stack. It might be a client you've never heard of. And it's just being able to jump straight in and thrive in that situation.
Yeah.
It changes all the time. Everything's changing. Like there's a big thing in consultancy, which is the joke of like, you always just say, it depends, because you never know what it will be.
Well, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah. So for us, it's looking for people who are like excited by that uncertainty and wanting to try lots of new things and develop in lots of areas rather than just become like a domain expert in one thing. They're quite happy being like T-shaped and getting a very wide skill set. Yeah.
Yeah, I've spent my career working in consultancy world, and it's very different to developing an app for a bank or something where you're just on a project and a product. You know, you need to wear many hats. You need to be able to juggle between different clients and industries and opportunities, which is for the right person quite exciting to do so, right? What about tech stack? You know, for developers listening to this, are there any particular tech stacks that you tend to hire for usually?
No, we're very, very generic in that respect because it all depends on the client. So there's certain things that obviously you look for. So like someone who's got a really solid experience in one tech stack can often use that on like train them in other areas or things like that. But people who've generally worked in more of the modern ways of working and modern approaches to tech was what we look for. Or just people who are passionate about learning something new, which is always great. But my recommendation for people in terms of things to learn is the language doesn't really matter too much.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are fairly similar, or you can use them in different ways anyway. And the same for even if you start looking more into like cloud infrastructure and stuff like that, there's still so much crossover between each one. So if you become really good in AWS, you can translate a lot of that into Azure, GCP.
Yeah.
So it's not too much of a concern for me for like what you should know. We don't have like you must be a JavaScript dev kind of thing.
So solid programming fundamentals is what you look for. Somebody that's able to learn the basics really, really well. I mean, the basics are the basics and they usually don't change. If you know Angular, you can learn React pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. And then, finding people that have that mindset and approach rather than going, I am Java, I live and breathe Java. I don't want to hear about anything else.
Yeah. That's okay. More of a product company who focus in Java. You'd be fantastic there if you did that.
Cool. Well, awesome. Well, look, if people are listening and interested, I'm sure they can check out your website. There'll be a careers page or something that they could have a look at. And thanks very much, Pete, for coming on the podcast.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Hey, thanks for watching this podcast. Make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, comment, etc., etc. And I'll see you in the next episode.